Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum. We want to welcome our friends and guests in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Maurice Salakan. I am pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's special guest is Dr. Velva Boles, a deeply committed healthcare professional on a mission during very challenging times. Our topic for today is Information is Power: What You Should Know About the Coronavirus Pandemic. Dr. Boles received her medical doctorate degree, her MD, from the University of Pittsburgh, her Doctorate of Philosophy degree, or PhD, in Health Sciences from Concordia University. She has a master's degree in chemistry from Duquesne University and a Bachelor of Science degree from North Carolina State University. Dr. Boles' primary instruction and research interests are extraneous biological and chemical processes which impact public health. Published white papers on securing potable water following the disaster using mobile hydration platform, closing the gap in disparity of healthcare for the elderly, and revolutionize modern snacks, reducing incidence of obesity in American youth, reflect her interest in socioeconomically driven issues and disparities of medical care available to Black Americans. Dr. Boles is a consummate teacher during having served as an assistant professor in the Department of Biochemistry at Colorado State University and an instructor at Front Range Community College School of Nursing in Fort Collins, Colorado, while in graduate school. She's currently an adjunct professor at Louisiana State University in Alexandria and Upper Iowa University Extension. Dr. Boles has worked in numerous industrial settings over her career, including as a senior scientist for Westinghouse, senior marketing consultant for Gulf Oil, USA, as a primary care physician in Louisiana, South Carolina, and Missouri, as a clinical medical director, certified medical investigator, laboratory medical director, visiting researcher at the Center for Disease Control, Zoonotic Division in Fort Collins, Colorado, assisting in research on investigating Hantavirus, Lyme disease, and dengue fever. And she is founder of Epiphany Enterprise 1 LLC. In 2013, Dr. Boles served as the primary physician for ACT's annual mission to Honduras, Central America, to provide clinical care. She has served on numerous nonprofit civic and research training boards in Louisiana, Pennsylvania, Missouri, and Texas, and is a past president of the Alexandria chapter of the Links Incorporated. And needless to say, this highly accomplished guest of ours has done a lot of lecturing and media work throughout the country. Like I said, she's on a mission, and I can't wait to dive into this topic that we have before us today. Without any further ado, I want to welcome our guest, Dr. Velva Boles, to the platform. Peace be unto you, my sister. Welcome to Salam Media.
Thank you so much. I have been anticipating this with great energies, and I'm looking forward to providing all information that I am capable of and answering all questions that may be put to me.
Let's begin at point A. You know, I found it interesting, this one of the notes in your background information concerning a virus that you investigated, Hantavirus. What is that?
Hantavirus, in 1990, there was an outbreak that took a number of lives on the Navajo Nation in Arizona. And that was a time when I was working with the CDC in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is a zoonotic division. And a number of people will say, I've never heard of that. I thought CDC was in Atlanta. The CDC in Atlanta are human focused, and the CDC in Fort Collins looks at zoonotic diseases. Hantavirus is a virus that lives in wildlife, just like the COVID-19 virus. And the reason it affected adversely the Navajo people is that a field mouse, which will get into your hogan, they have a ritual house called a hogan. And the hogan is a spiritual place that when someone is troubled or a family needs healing, a good example is when a number of sons have been in military and they come back to the reservation, the family might feel a need to retreat to a hogan. And that is a holy place of sorts. It's not a church or a temple or synagogue, but the hogan is a circular building that is dug out 3 to 4 feet into the ground, and then the housing is erected above it. So when you walk up to it, it looks like a 5-foot high building, but when you go in, it's a real 8-foot to 9-foot building. And digging into the earth is supposed to reconnect with Mother Nature and get the energies of ancient people. So the hogan is a very special place. It's a sacred retreat. Well, what had happened is in modern day, modern families were not visiting hogans as regularly as I suppose they had in the past. And when the families did decide to go and visit, they had been invaded by the field mouse that can get into a crack as small as a keyhole. And over this time, these animals had full range of the house, and they would urinate, as you know, that rodents will. And this virus lives within this animal. It doesn't make them sick. It doesn't affect them adversely. But the concentration of the virus was such that over time, when the people came in to clean the hogan, the thing that was a challenge for CDC is only women and elderly men were being succumbed with this pneumonia-like disease and dying within 24 to 48 hours. And when they brought in our group to investigate what's going on, it was very interesting. It was really the shaman, or I call them wise men or medicine men of the village, who answered the question. It wasn't CDC. I can only say, thank goodness, the federal authorities of the United States listened to the ancient word. And it basically, women who were sweeping out the hogan was making dust rise. And as dust rise, you inhaled the dust, and contained in that dust was the virus. And elderly men in the Navajo tradition are the watchers. They originally are the hunters. So they take a post, they kneel, or they go low to the ground or the floor, and they watch. And in the case of family, the older men watch the children. When children are allowed to roam free and get full experience, it's none of this Americanized behavior. Don't do that, stop that. They observe the child and allow the child to learn as much by experience as possible while still keeping them safe. Consequently, men were in a crouched position close to the floor. Women were actually agitating the dust of the floor and surfaces. So it was the elderly men and women who were most exposed to the hantavirus that was put into the air by moving dust. The shaman, when we consulted with them, said, there are times when, if the hogan is in disuse, we traditionally advise take all of the coverings out and burn it. Do not try to wash it, clean it, or dust it. And before you start to clean the surfaces, spray it with water. They said sprinkle, where you take a pan and you dip your hand and you sprinkle. And the reason was the ancient people said you had to contain the absence. Now that's an interesting way to think about it, but that was their language. And what we learned is that all that was necessary to contain this particular viral infection is when you went into a hogan after it had been locked up or away from humans for some time, to take a water bottle and spray surfaces with water, causing the dust not to rise, and then clean the surfaces or sweep the floor, because you would not be at risk of inhaling the virus when you start agitating it with duff cloths and brooms. So this very simple, ancient, what I call grandma common sense, stopped this scourge, because I'm pretty sure it was more than 100 people died. There were all kinds of negative press about what was going on in the Navajo Nation. And as you know, the Native American nations are sovereign. They're not part of the United States per se, but they can ask for assistance, as any nation can when they have something they're facing. So that was one of the things that was a major eye-opener to me, to say, listen to the people who are normal to that area, that all the education in the world cannot trump real experience, real life experience. So I always, when they ask me, say, yes, CDC was called in. Yes, CDC filed a report, but the persons who told us how to fix the problem, one, is when there is a high crop season, like lots of grasses due to heavy rain, you'll have an increase in this particular rat or mouse population. And once this population is high, their tendency to invade houses or invade barns is also high. So it really says, watch what's going on in your environment. If there's a heavy harvest of grains and an increased population of rodents, eradicate the rodents, be mindful of how you are keeping the grain, and when you go to clean in your rural setting, dampen the floor and hard surfaces before you start to dust and clean. So that was the history on hantavirus, and the bottom line is common sense and ancestors, that those who had come before with their very cryptic warnings: burn what is in the house, don't try to clean it, and moisten or sprinkle the surface before you clean. And this wisdom was not yielded to, I guess I would say, heeded by the more modern young people that were now inhabiting or trying to inhabit the hogan.
This gives us a perfect segue into our topic for discussion today. What is the coronavirus, and what distinguishes this virus, aka COVID-19, from other viruses? What distinguishes this pandemic?
The coronavirus is an ancient virus, over 6,000 years old, and we say that because that's as far as we can track it. Doesn't mean that it didn't exist before then. It is a tendency that humans do not call something a bad thing until it adversely affects humans. The coronavirus lives in wildlife. Now, the parallel when I say it lives, and people say, I don't understand. Let's consider the common cold. Many of us who gets a stuffy nose or start to sneeze or feel tired for 3 to 5 days, have a low-grade fever, someone will say, oh, he only has a head cold, or she only has a chest cold. And we don't get excited unless it goes to pneumonia. We just comfort the person, give them lots of fluid, vitamin C, and wait 7 or 10 days, and we go about our life. The common cold is a coronavirus, folks. It happens to be what we call an alpha coronavirus. That particular coronavirus makes us a little bit sick, but it doesn't kill us, and it doesn't give us long-term harm, so we disregard it and we live with it. Well, its cousin, the beta coronavirus, which is of the family of SARS and MERS, and now the one they're calling COVID-19 is really a SARS type coronavirus. The excitement or the fear, if you like, is because now this virus that for many, many years lived in wildlife on the same level as our common cold lives with humans, it crossed over. Now, the big discussion is, how did it cross over? Why did it cross over? Why is it a pandemic? Some are saying that in the markets where wildlife is sold as food, in the western part of the world, I can speak to the United States, when someone wants a chicken, they go to a grocery store. And this chicken has already been plucked and it's already been washed, and we're getting what we call a dressed animal. We never come in contact with this animal's living inhabitants. Whether, you know, we don't know what, some people don't even know what it eats or where it stays or that it had feathers or fur. We go to a grocery store and we buy it. And when you talk about open market purchasing, where you go and you literally see the animal itself, you pick the chicken, you pick the squirrel or whatever the meat is that you're choosing. And sometimes at the market, they may butcher for you. But I have been in places in Africa where you take the live animal home and dress it yourself. Well, as my understanding is, where the open market had the live animals available for purchase, over time, if you put, let's say, a chicken near a pig, near a duck, they're being in close proximity, they can exchange the flea that bit the duck might bite the chicken. So that's not controlled. That's not able to be controlled. You keep the area clean and you're mindful, but Mother Nature, when you put things in close proximity, there will be some communication. Well, the understanding is this virus that is normally in an animal they call the pangolin, and we've heard a lot about the bat. These two animals, mammals, and humans, by the way, are mammals, so keep in mind we're in that same grouping. Either the handler of the live animal or the purchaser of the live animal contracted the virus. Once the virus was in human, Mother Nature takes its course. All things that can affect living, whether it's the human or the animal, will mutate or change over time. And what we have seen is that the virus that once only lived in the animal found that it could also live in a human. And the receptor has been identified that this virus recognized from animal to human, and is called an ACE2 receptor, ACE-2, if you want to go and investigate it. This receptor in humans are found in the nose or nasal passages, it's found in the lungs, it's found in the intestine. And here's where things started to get troublesome. Had the person who was either in Wuhan, China, as the suspicions are that the START index person was, if it were in ancient times, when you traveled by animal, whether it's donkey or you traveled on foot or camel, then this virus would have been contained because the person who would have gotten the infection wouldn't go very far. But in modern day, you can get on a plane and fly in 6 to 10 hours around the world, halfway around the world. And what it appears is travelers from the source, and the idea of the source has been said to be China, they got on a plane and flew to New York, and flew to San Francisco, and flew to LA. And because no one was suspicious of the infection, whether the person felt well or didn't report feeling badly, with that rapid transit, they were able to now inoculate the airport in New York, the airport in San Francisco. And these were major movement points that you're in and out and you're standing in line and you're close together. And that's why and I couldn't leave out Florida, because during the time of this pandemic, there's something we call snowbirds, that people living in the snow areas like New York or Rhode Island or other areas, the elderly rich will fly to Florida. they have a Florida home. And so with all of this available travel, there was an instant inoculation of this virus into humans. And as it was shown in Italy, it was saying a very wealthy family had flown to a ski lodge and then flew back home, that it totally devastated a large population of senior citizens. So if you look at how this was tracking around the world, it was spread by the wealthy, it was gatewayed through airports, and the people who suffered most, unfortunately, in the United States were those who had no insurance, poor health care management, and marginalized people, which translated to Black Americans.
Mm-hmm. As you well know, Dr. Boles, there has been a tremendous amount of discussion, debate, accusations thrown, politicking for and against individuals based upon their conduct. We're talking about leaders now based upon their conduct in response to this global pandemic. Just a lot of heat, probably far more heat than light around this controversy. I want to share with you an exchange that just recently took place on Facebook that I wade into. And what I'm going to share with you is going to it's going to provide you with an opportunity to address a number of issues at once, because there are a number of issues that are encased in this very brief exchange that took place, the part that I'm going to share. There was an opening post of a very prominent religious leader from Iraq, who I don't know if he posted this, or my gut feeling is that he probably posted it somewhere within his own social media, and then it was shared by someone else, eventually making it across the sea here to the United States. The post from Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani of Iraq read, "Shall we take," it was titled, "Shall we take the COVID vaccine?" That was the title. And this is what he said, and this is basically what is called in Islamic terminology a fatwa. It was like a juristic decision that he made. He said, "In such circumstances, it is appropriate to rely on the advice given by experienced medical experts. As our Sharia, which is Islamic law, states, it is mandatory to use an approved vaccine in a situation when the probability of suffering from the coronavirus infection with its potentially life-threatening and or serious untreatable complications far outweigh the probable serious side effects of getting vaccinated," end quote. This was his ruling. The responses that followed are, again, representative of this hot button debate that's been raging here in the US and other parts of the world. One of the respondents said, "What do you say? Should you follow the advice? What does Allah, God Almighty, say about the Satan and his way of changing creation? To me, Allah says he has a remedy for all ills." Now, my response to this respondent was, irrespective of how one feels about the COVID vaccine controversies, Ayatollah Sistani's fatwa strikes me as being rooted in al-Sharia, or Islamic law, and medical science. Surely Allah, God Almighty, knows best. The respondent's response to me was, "Thing is, Brother Maurice Alakan, the hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists and doctors who have serious questions and warnings about this shot, and especially note that there are treatments that work, albeit currently banned, which begs the question, why? All have been censored. You will not hear most of them getting air on MSN. I know we like to think the best of people, and especially scientists, but science has been corrupted for a while. Follow the money and who's paying for lots of these studies. The rabbit hole is deep, and we tend to forget just how evil these people can be against other humans. Also note that Ayatollah Khamenei, another religious leader in Iran, basically said he does not trust them with their offers of a vaccine. In fact, Iran is working on their own vaccine, Cuba too. And if I had to choose which vaccine to take, I'd choose theirs. Please note Pfizer's vax has far more adverse effects than Moderna's so far. Will you even be allowed to pick which shot? Now, my final response to this respondent was as follows. Most reputable doctors and scientists have serious questions about the vaccines, and understandably so. The vaccines have been rushed into the consumer pipeline for a novel coronavirus, and there are many unknowns. It is also a fact, however, that the following appears to be the majority consensus among physicians, scientists, and responsible leaders of the public square. Number one, the pandemic is real. It's not fake. Number two, the benefits of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines appear thus far to greatly outweigh the risks. This is precisely the point that Ayatollah Sistani and a host of other Muslim jurists have been making. As for there being other treatments, i.e. repurposed drugs available that are presently being largely ignored by the medical and scientific establishment, this is a legitimate concern which should be receiving far more attention here in the US. This, however, along with capitalism's corrupting influence, is a whole different conversation. So, like I said, there's a lot packed into these exchanges that took place. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the exchanges are very, very intelligent. In listening, I nodded on a couple of things, and the responses, I think, are most credible. So my way I would enter into this discussion, had I been there live with those having it, is my position when I start to talk about vaccines. I start by saying vaccines are not the only answer. And my greatest objection to the way in which the United States and other countries are presenting this, quote, solution, is you must be vaccinated. I stand firmly that is false. There are people who cannot have an immune response to a vaccine. Now, many people think the vaccine in itself is the cure. It's not. A vaccine stimulates the body to launch an immune response. So with that understanding, we have to admit there are people who cannot raise a response to the vaccine stimulant, and no one is addressing that group. When Pfizer got its emergency acceptance and Moderna got its emergency acceptance, they whispered the exceptions. The exceptions include anyone under the age of 16. You have all of these young people going to school who cannot qualify for the vaccine, but are equally at risk of being infected. If we were being complete in our concept of herd immunity or covering everybody, then we need a multi-focus approach to getting the herd immunity. Vaccination is one. Passive immunity is another one. Passive immunity is the injection of antibodies that can be made in the lab, just like the vaccine can, as the company Eli Lilly. They have an approved passive immunity process. How do I know? Look at what happened to Donald Trump. He got the COVID positive and was given Regeneron. What is Regeneron? It is antibodies. It's a monoclonal antibody or a heteroclonal antibody, which was injected 3 days later. That antibody cleared the virus, and he came out bragging that he no longer had a viral count. That technology exists. The component exists. So why is it not being offered and presented to the people as an alternative? The exclusions for all of the vaccines now approved include the following. First, if you cannot mount an immune response, you say, who are these? The elderly over the age of 80, I'd say over the age of 75. Many people have a sluggish immune system and cannot mount an immune response. You can give them the vaccine, but if their body cannot respond, that vaccine essentially is wasted. You could, however, give them a passive immunity, the immunoglobulins, and protect them from 3 to 6 months passively. People would say, what do you mean passive immunity? I said, the best example is breastfeeding. Every mother who gives birth to a child secretes a solution called colostrum. And for 2 to 3 days after the birth of a child, not just humans, I'm talking animals as well, cows, sheep, horse. If you ever talk to a wise farmer, he will tell you he wants that calf or that little lamb to nurse within the first few hours of birth. What is happening during that natural process is called passive immunity. The mother is supplying to this newborn these antibodies against whatever she has experienced in that environment, and it is critical. So I come back and say, humans, we're the intelligent group. Why would I subject an elderly senior to a foreign body, whether it's messenger RNA or any other viral particle, and say, body, now I'm giving you a new stressor, go and make some antibodies against this, when an alternative, which we have known about since 1901, in 1901, a physician received the Nobel Prize for demonstrating passive immunity. So if we have known this for 120 years, why isn't that also a frontline treatment? When they talked about the emergency acceptance of Pfizer messenger RNA vaccine, very quietly, I heard over the news line, but heard more of it in my webinars that I attend, say Eli Lilly is offering passive immunity antibodies to children under the age of 16 who are not eligible for the vaccine. Now I ask you, have you heard that on any news media? Have you heard it on any airways? It was very quietly stated. So I'm saying we're out giving senior citizens injections with marginal possibility of them even mounting an immune response when they could alternatively be offered a passive immunity, and they could have enjoyed the holidays with their children and loved ones without the risk of death. So I strongly question any establishment that gives you a single thing, making it sound like the only thing when nothing could be further from the truth. So my cry or outcry to particularly Black Americans, you are been labeled the ones with comorbidities. What does that mean? If you have diabetes, you have a compromised immune system. If you have high blood pressure, the COVID likes the ACE2 receptor. I just mentioned that. Guess what? There are so many ACE2 receptors inside of your blood vessels. If you should get the infection of this particular virus and it goes to those receptors, you will have blood clots, which means stroke, which means heart attack, which means amputation. Now, what you hear about is cough, fever, and diarrhea. But the population that is most severely, when you hear severe COVID, you hear that term, oh, they had a severe COVID, they're telling you it is not the typical cough, fever, and GI diarrhea. And the group who is most prone for the severe COVID are Black Americans who predominate with diabetes, hypertension, renal injuries, vascular injuries, And then again, very quietly, they say, if you have a food allergy, that means shellfish or any other kind of food allergy, or if you've ever had an adverse reaction to a medication. So if you've had anything that you had to change the medicine because it gave you a rash or made you hoarse or made you have leg cramps, or if you're allergic to bee stings or peanut butter, or if you have an immune disease like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. And I'm saying all of these things that they're lumping in one little category. If you have any allergies, talk to your doctor. And I say most of the people who could be most adversely affected don't have ready access to a doctor. Right. If you're on Medicaid or Medicare in the United States, that organization, the federal decision is how often you visit a doctor. And I'm speaking from clinical experience. You get 3 visits a year paid for. If you go outside of those paid for visits, it is either an emergency room visit or you have to pay out of pocket. So how casually they talk about something called an anaphylactoid reaction. And they say, oh, we know how to treat it. All you have to do is some epinephrine and then steroid. Yes, if when you have such a problem, someone will listen to you. In New Orleans, 73% of the people who had severe COVID-19 were turned away from the emergency room at least 4 to 5 times because they were Black. When they came in and said, I have diarrhea, I have muscle pain, I'm tired, they said, nope, we will not test you for COVID, go home. Why? Because they had accepted only the symptoms that white people had. I'm saying it plainly. The Chinese and the Italians had a cough, had a fever, and some GI complaints. The Black Americans in New Orleans did not present that way. They had stomach aches, diarrhea, muscle pain, and fatigue. And many of them would call me and say, Dr. Boles, I've been to the ER 3 times. I took my mother and they keep sending me away. What should I do? How can I do this? And I would keep saying, don't let them send you away if you feel strongly. So by the time the doctors at these various institutions, and trust me, Louisiana has some real big name institutions that were practicing the CDC advisement of cough and fever. When they finally said, let's treat the patient and stop reading this piece of paper, they discovered that these people coming in who were Black Americans were in very severe, dire situation because they had lost a lot of fluids. The virus had multiplied many times in their body, and they came in dying. And that's why the numbers initially, February a year ago, were 78% of the deaths for COVID-19 in New Orleans were Black Americans. 63% of those dying in Detroit were Black Americans. 58% in Chicago were Black Americans. No one, you didn't hear Fauci addressing it. You didn't hear CDC president addressing it because the issue had to do with the treatment that Black people in America were receiving from the establishment and established care. That symptoms, I was trained as a physician, that symptoms is what a patient will tell you and signs are what you observe. And neither of those are more important than the other. And what I observed a year ago were people saying these are the only signs we will accept. And I've never heard of that. To me, that's a very pejorious practice of medicine. And under the circumstance of being just bombarded with so many people with symptoms outside of that was allowed, should have awakened their action much sooner than it did. So, the vaccine or not the vaccine, my comment is you have other choices. And my position is demand these other choices, that the monoclonal antibody or the heteroclonal antibody that people such as Eli Lilly has perfected and offered should be as open and available to you as anything that Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson is coming forth with. Those are true, tried, medical, tested. If it's been around 120 years, I have had monoclonal antibodies given to me when I first traveled out of the country because they wanted to protect me. So it's not a guesswork. It's not hypothetical. If you're looking in the engineering world, they'll say proof of concept is already there. The proof of concept for the various vaccines we're talking about is not there. That there has never been in the history of man a vaccine that was injecting messenger RNA into your body. I can say it and say nothing else, because no one can come back and say that's not true. You're trying to be a fearmonger. No, never in the history of man has either messenger RNA, which is Pfizer and Moderna, I understand AstraZeneca is DNA. These are genetic materials being injected, allowing your body's ribosomes to create a foreign protein to which your body is supposed to generate antibodies. That is the process. That proof of concept is new. It has not ever in the history of man been used. So I can stand firmly on that. Do you say, is that more dangerous than the traditional vaccines? Only time will tell. Well, what are the side effect possibilities? There are many. All of them are speculative. There is insufficient data to show that this is to be expected or not to be expected. But they do tell you, if you have a history of Bell's palsy, that this vaccine may contribute to your having Bell's palsy. So all of the contraindications that I've mentioned are said in a quiet voice. And these contraindications, they're saying, check with your private physician. And my response to that is, the very group which can be most adversely affected do not have ready access to a private physician, is not immediately listened to when they present with a symptom that's not accepted by major America before they get there. So I made a comment that people in New Orleans had to die to prove that COVID-19 did more than have a cough and a fever. And I don't recommend anyone to die to prove something. That's not what the medical profession is designed for. I take my position as a steward. And when you have that position, I have to listen to you. I have to look and apply knowledge that I've gotten to help you. I'm not there to judge you or state what is and is not possible. I am the student every time I walk into a clinical environment. How am I a student? I have to learn from the person coming to seek help. And what am I trying to learn? I'm trying to learn, how can I help you? I am not to be exclusive, and certainly it should not be for financial benefit. You mentioned other medications. Ivermectin has been used extensively outside the United States. And let me pause and talk about ivermectin. In countries where people have parasites, worms or liver flukes or other kinds of filarias, like even in malaria, that is a live parasite. We use certain kind of anti-inflammatory medicines on a regular basis when you talk about tropical medicine or infectious disease medicine. Ivermectin has a long history of stopping the inflammatory response. Now, why is that important in COVID-19? The majority of deaths due to COVID-19 is because of a hyperimmune response. Now, there's a whole category of describing what cascades and what's involved, but for those who want to understand this point, your lungs must be able to get oxygen, migrate into these air sacs from your blood, so that, the oxygen to migrate through the air sacs to your blood, so you can oxygenate your body, and the carbon dioxide in your blood can migrate into those air sacs and you breathe it out. In a severe immune response, cells migrate to the lung and they fill up those air sacs, either with mucus or water or even the cells themselves. And when this happens, the oxygen and CO2 cannot pass through the walls of these thickened alveolars, and you suffocate. And that's why in the early stages last year, you heard ventilators, we're running out of ventilators. And then finally, one of the emergency room doctors said, this isn't a ventilator issue, that we can put as much pressure as we want in the lungs. The tissue of these air sacs are thickened. They are no longer penetratable by oxygen and CO2. So putting this pressure, which a ventilator does, pressurize the air, is not helping. So what could help is anything that can slow down that inflammatory response. So they started looking at what are agents that we already know that can slow down inflammatory responses. And that's how you heard about hydrochloroquine, and they tried it, it didn't work. They talked about steroids. Steroids work sometime, not always. But the people who tried ivermectin found it to be consistently helpful when a person was in severe COVID. Now, I've read some of the papers, I've seen some of the articles, and to me, that data, if it says that it can save more than 60% of the people who otherwise have no choice, oxygen won't help, we have no antibiotic, why not approve ivermectin? Right. I don't know. Is it political? I don't know. Is it financial? I don't know. But I think that the people should understand you have more choice than simply the vaccines. That's the biggest note that I want to sing is there are alternatives, and I think they should be offered and not withheld.
I agree. You know, Dr. Boles, you, as a physician scientist, this is what you are, a physician scientist. In your opinion, is COVID-19 overreported or underreported?
Wow. I don't think it's overreported. In fact, again, see, I'm an inclusive person. I bring everybody in the circle that I think should be there and make sure they spread it outward. What is happening, unfortunately, the original COVID-19, the beta coronavirus, the spike protein virus, has started mutating. There are over 30 mutations. Now, someone said, why is it mutating? What are you talking about? My best way to explain a mutation is I bring it to a very humble level. If you know a child is 10 years old and you interact with them and they're a skinny little kid, they're a beautiful child, and you see that child 4 years from now, and now it's a young man with a gravelly voice and a few whiskers on his chin, and he's taller than you are. What happened in those 4 years is the child mutated or he changed. He has grown with time. There's nothing wrong with him. He's the same young man you used to know, but to see him now, he is very different. So if you accept that living, just being alive, gives rise to change. We miss it when we get to be old. We might see our hair get gray, or we may be losing some hair, and those are such changes. But when something is new and young, it changes rapidly and majorly. So coronavirus in the human is new. So the changes that it's going through, adapting to its new host, are many. So these new strains, as they're referring to, they've now come out to see that 3 out of some 30, there's more than 30 changes that has been observed for those who are tracking the changes, but 3 of them has caused this virus to become more aggressive. Now 29 of them, no big deal, but 3 of them has made them fierce. The UK version, which they are calling B117, it is showing that it can spread more rapidly. Give you an example. 100 people in a room, 1 person has the infection. This infection, because it's more contagious, you would expect 10 to 12 people to be inoculated. Where with the original virus, if you had one person in the room and 100 people, maybe one other person would be inoculated. So it's 10 to 12 times more aggressive in being able to infect you. And I'm going to pause for a minute. When we as scientists talk about infection, there's multiple processes. The first process is attachment. And that's why they tell you to wear a face mask. Attachment is you breathe the air, some virus particles are in the air, it attaches to the inside of your nasal passage. You're in a group singing, and you take that deep breath so you can hit that high note, and these particles in the air will go into the throat and on the tongue. So with a face mask, you are stopping attachment. You're not allowing to get into your nose, you're not allowing to get into your throat. After attachment is invasion. If you start having a sore throat and you find yourself saying, you can't get it cleared, or you're a little bit hoarse, that's another phase of it, and that is invasion. You may not yet have a fever, you may not yet have a headache, but you have that sore throat and that irritating, itchy sensation in the throat. Invasion. Once you start fever, what that means is the virus has begun to replicate or grow in your body. Because when the virus count gets to be a certain level, it will burst out of your cell. So the bursting out of the cell, the body reacts with a fever. And it often also reacts with a headache. That means you have now a viral infection because it has attached, it has invaded, it has replicated. So when you're talking Ayurvedic medicine or alternative medicine or folk medicine, you will hear them giving you remedy to interrupt the process. They will say, oh, when you've been exposed, then you need to use the neti pot and wash your nose to detach the virus. Or you need to gargle with warm salt water to detach the virus. People say, well, does that work? The answer is yes. If you minimize attachment, then you minimize the potential of ultimately being infected. So the old ways make sense. Some of the modern application of Ayurvedic, they say, well, zinc lozenges. They have shown that the zinc lozenges prevent attachment, which means that if you have a sore throat, you go to zinc lozenges, you go to gargling. Is there a potential for you to reduce the attachment? The answer is yes. So the remedies that were offered before we got so sophisticated was reacting to the process that had been observed by the elders. But moving forward, when you ask about the virus is mutating. We now have 3 very aggressive strains. One is from UK, B117. The other is out of South Africa, and they call that 501Y.V2. And then there's one out of Brazil, which they call P1. The biggest shakeup to the scientific world is the South African virus is not susceptible to the vaccine that Pfizer makes and Moderna makes. So you may hear them talking about Pfizer and Moderna may offer a booster after you've taken the first 2 shots. What they herald as good news is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which just got approved. It is effective against the South African strain, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a single dose. You don't take 2 shots, you take a single shot. So things are evolving very rapidly. And the debates of should you take the vaccine or not should now be which vaccine, and not only which vaccine, or is this vaccine moving as fast as this mutations of the virus. So again, if you went to the alternative methods, you wouldn't have that concern. If I give you a heterozygous antibody, it should be effective against a wide variety of strains.
Dr. Boles, I do hope that, folks who are tuned into this conversation right now, especially in South Africa, are paying close attention, and they will share this video with others after our conversation is completed, and we're nearing our end now. I knew that time was just going to fly. An hour is nothing for a conversation like this. An issue like this is so important. You've touched upon the importance of alternative remedies and a multi-focused approach to herd immunity. I see you. This is my third time having an opportunity to hear from you, and by the grace of Almighty God, it's through a platform that I have a little something to do with. From the very first time I heard you with a panel of African American thinkers. I mean, these were there were some doctors in the mix, there were some political scientists, etc. I mean, it was a very, very thought-provoking discussion you all had, and I was just overcome with joy to have been exposed to that conversation, and I shared it as widely as I could. And then just recently, you were with the Kidland Network, and I have some friends, personal friends, connected to that network, and that is how I was able to get in touch with you and to invite you to this platform. And God willing, we're going to have you back again, because you are clearly a healthcare professional on a mission. And you come from a very unique perspective as an African American, as someone who is sensitive to the struggles that we as a people have had, especially when it comes to issues like medicine and access to healthcare, and quite frankly being abused at various times by systems, which has made us, understandably, many of us, very distrustful of systems of this nature. But the reality being that we have to engage these systems and work through that distrust. But the best way to do that is through persons like you. Part of your mission is, well, I'm going to let you tell it. What are you hoping will come out of these discussions that you have been having as it pertains to a more holistic response to this crisis that we as a nation and a world are in, and especially in how it affects your people and other marginalized communities? What is your mission right now? What are you striving to accomplish?
My greatest mission is education with action. And I attach action because education without action is entertainment, and I am not in the entertainment business. My greatest appeal or aspiration immediately or acutely, as we say, is to get to Joe Biden White House COVID-19 group and integrate the needs of Black people into what they are offering. I have not seen in anything they've said or observed by new appointments that they are addressing the very difficulties that have marginalized Black people. It is not a casual statement to say discuss it with your primary care physician. Too many Black people have emergency room physicians as their primary care physician. That's a reality. And right. If they are in the comorbidity group, then special attention needs to be provided. There should be follow-up, not a 15-minute observing of someone who may have taken the inoculation, because when they leave, they may need your help and don't have access. I think there should be a provision for if you take the vaccine and you do start to have adverse consequences, Bell palsy, Guillain-Barré disease, development of lupus, exacerbation of MS, or any other kind of autoimmune condition, that there be an obligation of the United States healthcare to take that seriously and provide care. I am most afraid that, like the syphilis experiment that went on for 40 years, and the utilization of an HBCU like Tuskegee as the place for people to come and get no care but just observation can be repeated, because the people involved were the same people now, CDC and PHS, that is the Center for Disease Control and Public Health Service, ran the Tuskegee experiment, folks. And for you that don't know, that was 40 years of observing syphilis ravage generations of Black people while telling those farmers they had bad blood and paying local doctors not to treat them with the known penicillin care. That is an American legacy that is not made up, it's not false, it's there. So therefore, United States, President Joe Biden, COVID-19 herd immunity, make the provisions that establish the trust, or let's say can establish a trust that has been lost among a marginalized people.
Okay, we are 3 minutes over the mark, but you know, given the fact that this is the last program, and I'm so thankful for that. This is actually the last program in the line of Sunday programs in Salam Media's lineup for Sundays. We are the last program, and so we have a little latitude, and we have a very understanding engineer that from time to time, when we need to, allows us to go a little bit over. I want to end this conversation for now with a very deeply felt thank you, Dr. Velva Boles, for being the person that you are, for being on the mission that you are. We're going to do what we can to put pressure on some of our prominent leaders and organizations. Congressional Black Caucus should be all over this. I mean, they should be spearheading a campaign for Dr. Boles to be a part of whatever COVID-19 response there is, especially within the African American community. So the word is out there, the word is being spread, and we're going to continue to do our part to help spread it, to help generate pressure. Are there any final thoughts you want to make before we sign off for today's program? Any final thoughts?
I invite my people to be there to ask questions. Don't be herded like sheep. There are alternatives. Make the request and let your voice be heard. Let your voice be heard.
Couldn't be a more effective and much needed final thought than that. Thank you again, Dr. Velva Boles. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go as extensively into your background as I did at the beginning is because I wanted folk to know, folk who tuned into this program to know this is not just someone talking off the top of her head, someone with a with a great gift for gab, that sounds more substantive than what she really is. No, you are a very substantive sister. I am very honored to know you. I'm so pleased and honored to know that someone like you is in the mix, pushing hard for justice, for equity in this healthcare field. For me, this is another example of why universal healthcare is absolutely needed. Universal healthcare is needed. It should be considered a human right, and it's a shame that a country as prideful as America, as resourced as America is lagging way behind other Western quote-unquote democracies on universal healthcare. But that's another discussion for another day. Inshallah ta'ala, we're going to have you back. Thank you so much for the time you gave us today. God bless you. And with that, to our Salam Media audience in South Africa and here in the U.S. And other parts of our global community. We sign off as we normally do with those beautiful verses from the Quran, from the Surah Asr, or the time. In Arabic, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, wal Asr, innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati, wa tawassaw bil haqq, wa tawassaw bis sabr. Which means in translation, in the name of Allah, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, by the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Thank you again. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.